Much for joining Build It Green's webinar this morning. Before we get started, I just wanted to make sure everybody is set up and can hear me okay. So as you'll see on this screen, you'll see the control panel to the right, usually on your screen, and it controls panes that can be expanded or collapsed by clicking the positive or negative sign on the left side of each pane. You may want to try doing that. And you can locate the grab tab, which is those two black arrows, and you can do that to open and close the control panel. And within this panel, you'll see the viewer window where you can click that square to toggle between full screen and window mode. And then you'll also see the hand icon, which you can click to raise or lower your hand. Don't worry about that last icon, the mic, as you'll all be muted during this webinar. And so if you can't hear me, please raise your hand so that we can help troubleshoot. We'll give a minute to see if anybody has raised their hands. But again, you just click that little hand to raise and lower it. And if you can't hear me, go ahead and click it. While we're waiting, I just want to bring your attention down to the questions pane below. During the question and answer portion of the webinar, you are invited and encouraged to type in your questions into that questions chat box, and we'll read them for our presenter to answer. So yeah, okay. So Karen, our technical producer, she will help. Looks like there's one person that has their hand raised. So once that's taken care of, you can lower your hand. Okay. So before we begin, I just wanted to also bring to your attention, if you're experiencing an echo and if you're using the voice over IP, which is audio through your computer, you may want to switch and call in on a landline telephone. Okay. So a little bit about Build It Green. I'd like to welcome everybody to our presentation entitled Solar Electric Systems. My name is Michelle Brown, and I'll be your host this morning. Build It Green offers monthly webinars as part of our continuing education offerings and member benefits, as members receive free admission to our webinars as well as free access to our webinar library. Please note that this webinar and the PowerPoint slides will be available for download in our members-only webinar library by early next week. And if you're not a member of Build It Green, we hope you will consider becoming part of Build It Green's member community and helping to support our work in California. Visit our website to learn more. Today's webinar is worth 1.5 CEUs, but we can only give you credit if you stay on for the whole time. And just to note, you don't need to submit this course for recertification, as we will upload it into your record, and that takes about a month. Okay, so on today's agenda, we are going to break the presentation into 3 parts, and so there will be 3 about 5 to 10 minute Q&A breaks in between, and then there'll be a little bit more time at the end. So you can see how that's broken up there. And as I mentioned earlier, during the Q&A portion, you are invited to type in your questions to that question chat box, and we'll read them for Mark to answer. And again, everybody will be muted, so you won't be able to ask your question live. Just want to let you know, we're going to send out a very, very quick short survey that'll go out immediately after the webinar. I think it's about 4 questions. We'd appreciate it if you could fill it out to let us know how we're doing with our offerings. Okay, so on today's webinar this morning, we're very, very lucky to have with us Mark Byington, President of Cobalt Power Systems, which is a leading solar electric system installer located in Mountain View, California. Prior to founding Cobalt in 2003, Mark spent 25 years in Silicon Valley as a design engineer, VP of engineering, VP of marketing, and COO at several startup companies in the wireless field. Mark holds a BSEE degree from Stanford. You please say hello, Mark.
Hello, everybody.
Great. Okay, so I'm just going to take a minute to switch over the control to him. He will accept that, and then...
So I type on show my screen.
Yes. Great. Okay. So we'll have Mark take it away. He's just going to... There we go. Okay, take it away, Mark.
Hello, everybody. Hopefully you can all see my slides. So good morning to everybody. My goal is to give you as much information as I can about PV systems, photovoltaic systems, and answer any questions you have. And at the end of the seminar, I hope that you all have a good appreciation for how it works, what are the benefits to the user, to the owner, how much does it cost, what are the government incentives, and in particular I noticed there's a number of designers and architects and builders on the roster of today's seminar. So you're probably interested in what direction should it face, what's the best roof tilt angle, and what do I need to do to accommodate a photovoltaic system in my building envelope if my client wants to have a PV system. So it's always better to think ahead when you're putting in a PV system. All the time we get people who have a house already built, or that it's framed, or it's pretty well underway and they decide at the last minute to add PV, and it's always a compromise. So if you think of it ahead of time, that usually is optimum in terms of system performance. So just a brief overview. There's two kinds of solar, and I think most of you know this. There's what's called a solar hot water or solar thermal system, and that primarily is used to heat a swimming pool or to heat domestic hot water. And so we won't be talking about that type of solar in today's session. The other type is called a photovoltaic system or a PV system or solar electric system, and that's all that we're going to talk about today. And so a PV system has great environmental benefits and reduces your electric bill, and a solar hot water system also has great environmental benefits and reduces your gas bill typically. So we'll go ahead and dive into solar electric systems or PV systems. All right, let's see here. So there's many wonderful reasons to put in a PV system. You can have a zero bill if you put in the appropriately sized system. It'll give you a hedge against rising electricity prices. If you have a zero bill, you don't really care what electric prices do over time because you have a zero bill, and you'll continue to have a zero bill. It has wonderful environmental benefits because every kilowatt hour that your PV system generates is a kilowatt hour that you don't buy from the utility. And in Northern California, mostly PG&E. And in California, we get more than 50% of our electricity from burning natural gas. So that of course, gives off carbon dioxide, which some people believe causes global warming. So generating your own clean power from the sun has great environmental benefits. There's great incentives, and there's a little bullet there. Actually, when we get to the end, I'll give you some specific examples of the environmental benefit, but it can be equivalent to planting 5, 10, 15,000 trees in terms of CO2 mitigation, depending on how big your system is. So it really has some very significant environmental benefits. Okay, we won't spend too much time on this particular slide, but just briefly, how does it work? And by the way, Michelle, can they see my arrow?
They can.
Okay, great. So you have a PV array on the roof, or it can be on the ground. It generates a direct current. It goes to an inverter, or one or more inverters. The inverter converts the DC to the AC alternating current that your house or your business needs. And then the alternating current is fed to your electric panel. I guess the electric panel's here. I think what they're trying to show is it's on the outside of the house, but we're sort of looking through the house. So this is your main electric panel, 200 amp service, 400, whatever you have. And it basically powers your whole house. And then when there's excess power being generated beyond what you need, it'll spin your meter backwards. And customers love seeing their meter go backwards, and it really does happen. And pretty much every day, typically, you'll generate more power than you need when the system is designed properly, and that will basically make up for the energy you buy at nighttime when there's no sunlight. And then, of course, 4 is your meter. Meter will spin backwards, and then it literally provides power to the grid and literally helps to power your neighbors' homes, but you get credit for it. Okay? And by the way, feel free to write in questions. Michelle will interrupt me. I'm happy to have interruptions, or we can wait for the break, whatever works the best. So for the next 5 or 6 slides, I'm going to show you some typical examples of PV systems, PV array, and you'll get an idea of what they look like. And there's lots of different ways to design a photovoltaic system. And many of you have seen probably some of the less than sterling examples of PV arrays on the roof. And in the old days, they sort of had a lot of grid lines showing, and maybe they were tilted up at a kind of ungainly angle. And we try to really have aesthetics be a part of our installations. And part of that is using a product, a solar module that really looks good. And so what you're looking at here is a SunPower black on black, and it's on a composition roof, and this is in Los Altos. And you can see that it really doesn't look too bad. This is right on the front of the house. And we actually have some clients, by the way, who say they want it on the front of their house, believe it or not. This is a message for you architects out there. Most people think that it's best on the back of the house or side of the house. But we do have a smaller percentage of people who want to make a political statement, and they want to show their neighbors that they're doing their part, and so they actually prefer to have it on the front of the house, and this is one example of that. So we try to make it so it looks good. So this is the typical mounting post that we use. This is a solid aluminum, 1 1/4 inch diameter post. It's bolted to the rafters. You can see it has a conventional flashing. So really, for you builders out there and architects and designers, you really treat it just like a vent pipe. It's just a penetration through the roof with a proper flashing and a rubber boot on the top. Okay, here's a great example of a tile roof, and this is actually a 120-year-old Italian tile that was brought in for this particular client. The builder brought it in, and we mounted the PV array in a recessed manner. So it's actually recessed down into the tile, and you can't even see it from the ground. I'm actually on a neighbor's driveway that's sort of above this particular property. So this is a great example of having it look good and also being able to have the financial and environmental benefits of it. And we've done this several times, recessing it into a curved tile. Here's a standing seam roof, and this is a small winery up on Montebello Ridge. And the beautiful thing about standing seam roofs is we actually attach to the seam, which is a little 3/8 of an inch wide or 1/2 inch wide seam, and so there's no penetrations. And this is a wonderful way to keep it low to the roof, make it look great, and also have 0 penetrations. And this is also a SunPower system. Here is a wood shake roof, a very similar situation. In this case, this was an existing roof, so what we do is we core, we call it a core drill, a 4-inch diameter hole saw. We go down to the rafter, we mount those same posts that I showed you a minute ago, and we bring a roofer in to put the roof back together. For new construction, it would be much easier. It's just like a vent pipe. But again, this is a SunPower array on a wood shake roof, and this is Portola Valley. Some of you may be familiar with what's called a CalPack roof. This is, again, his existing roof. Either Decra or CalPack is a metal shingle that's designed to look like tile, but it's literally a very thin metal shingle, and it has air underneath it. And we use what we call a J-bracket to actually sneak out from underneath the tile. And again, there's no penetrations here. And then the rails, you can imagine, are mounted horizontally on these J-brackets that you're looking at. And then the solar array mounts on top of the rails. So this is a great way to mount a PV array on a CalPack type roof with 0 penetrations. Actually, you have 1 penetration for the DC conduit. Okay. Here's an example of an older installation. We did this about 6 years ago, and this is in Los Altos Hills. These are Sharp modules. So you can see the way they used to look with the grid lines and the aluminum colored frames. They just don't look really nearly as nice as a SunPower product these days with a black frame and 0 grid lines. But I show this picture for 2 reasons. One, so you can see how well the state-of-the-art has progressed, not just in terms of performance, but also in terms of aesthetics. But second of all, this is the front of the house. And this house, as you can see, is a very nice house. It's about 6,500 square feet. And they wanted it on the front of the house. This was an environmental and a political statement. And you can drive right by this house and look at it. And I think it took a lot of guts for this particular client to put these panels on this house. And I'm really proud of them for doing it. And they just think it's the best thing that they ever did in their life. So just something to think about in terms of front of the house. Okay. There's also a type of solar panel called BIPV, which stands for Building Integrated Photovoltaic, and this is an example. We don't really recommend it. It's expensive, It's very labor-intensive to install, and it's low efficiency. And one of the reasons it's low efficiency is there's no air circulation underneath the array, which causes it to have lower efficiency. But sometimes people ask about BIPV, so that I thought I would show an example.
Is this in lieu of a roof? So this is the roofing material as well as a solar system?
Right. So what you're looking at is the concrete, lightweight concrete tile on the side, which is the gray color. It's a flat concrete tile, and then the blue is actually the sharp solar panel, which takes the place of 5 tiles. And I think BIPV is a great idea for new construction, especially for tract homes, but I would say for custom homes or for existing retrofit, I generally don't recommend it, because you end up taking the tile off and then you have to do something with the tile, and you're suffering the cost of the tile that you don't need anymore, and again, it's low efficiency and expensive. But anyway, that's a BIPV example. Here is an example of a trellis mount, and this is a Sanyo array, Sanyo modules in Saratoga, California. And even though there's a pool there, don't get confused. This is generating electricity, and it's powering the home and spinning the meter backwards, just like we talked about a minute ago. But it just happened to be a good place to put the PV array where you really don't see it that much. And I took this picture from the top of a second-story ladder, so that's why you're seeing it. I guess you would see it from a window. But I think it looks pretty good, and it does the job for them. So that's an example of a trellis mount.
Sorry to interrupt you, but somebody wrote in that they said the last 2 examples did not allow access to all panels. That was a question. So.
Okay, there's a question about allowing access to panels. I'm not sure what the listener is asking, but it might be for cleaning or for maintenance. And so I'll address both of those. First of all, really, one of the big advantages of PV systems is there is almost no maintenance. And we do recommend you wash the panels off about every 6 months. Other than that, really, there literally is no maintenance. We just want you to keep an eye on your inverter, make sure that you have a green light on during the day, and basically you're good to go. 25-year power output warranty on the solar panels. So it's pretty easy to wash the array off with a hose with a good nozzle, one of those brass nozzles, and you can typically even sometimes stand on the ground and direct a stream of water up to the roof and hit the whole array. And you just want to wash it down once, wait 5 minutes, wash it down again. So you don't really need access. And then if there were to be some reason why we would need to get access to a solar panel in the middle of the array, that's our problem, not your problem. And we would take modules off to get to the middle, but we almost never need to do that. Okay, so that's a trellis mount. Here's something called a pole mount, and the reason we call it a pole mount is because there's one single pole in the middle that holds up the array. This one happens to be an Orinda, and it's a SunPower array. But the reason we use pole mounts is when you have, so first of all, why would you use a ground mount instead of a roof mount? Sometimes the roof does not allow it, it's not easy to use the roof because it doesn't face the right direction, or you have too much shading, or the client doesn't want it on the roof, so we do ground mounts. And a pole mount is one variation where you have a single 8-inch diameter Schedule 80 pipe that holds up the whole array. And the nice thing about pole mounts is you can have the array face in a different direction than the way the ground runs. So if you look at this particular picture, you see the hillside kind of sloping off to the right. Well, that would have been east-facing, and that's not optimum, which we'll talk about in a minute. So we used a pole mount to be able to face due south and have it look good and still be able to have a ground mount. And a little further on, you'll see what we call a ground mount, literally, where there's not a single pole but a bunch of legs. And you'll see that when it faces in a different direction than the ground runs, it really starts looking kind of ungainly with legs a lot longer on one end than on the other end. So this is what's called a pole mount. I actually have another picture.
And if you could go back one about the trellis mount, somebody wrote in to say, Joanna asked, the trellis mount means the roof below those panels is not waterproof, or what?
In this particular case, the roof is waterproof. The trellis was built by the builder before the customer decided to do PV. And so we came in and did waterproof mounts on the roof. It's a tar and gravel roof, And so yes, the roof is completely waterproof. Another type of trellis mount can be, for instance, a redwood, what some people call a arbor, or a, there's another word for it. But basically over your patio you might have like 2x6s on end, 2x8s, 2x10s on edge, you know, with 2x2s running the other direction, and that would be called kind of a garden type arbor, and in that case it would not be waterproof, and you'd have a small gap between the panels and water could drip down. So it just depends on what the client wants. Good question. So there's a pole mount. Here's another pole mount, and this is up on Skyline Boulevard, and again this is the older Sharp type module where you see the aluminum frame and the grid lines, but it gives you a better way of seeing the construction technique with a single pole holding it up. And of course we trenched from here up to the house, which is to your left, in order to bring the DC power up. Okay, and then here's a ground mount, and this is in Carmel, and this is SunPower. And again, the ground mount typically wants to have the array face the same direction that the land runs. And then here's one more ground mount, and this is a different brand called SunTech. And SunTech is #1 in the world. It's from China. It's the best quality product from China, actually a very good quality, but doesn't have the performance of a SunPower. SunPower is 45% more efficient than a typical solar panel. So not only is it extremely efficient, but it also looks great with that all-black look. And we can talk more about that if anybody wishes.
Where's that from?
SunTech is a U.S. company. It's based in San Jose, California, and they have several factories, one of which is in Milpitas in the Bay Area, and most of the production comes from the Philippines.
This was the SunPower.
SunPower. SunPower is different than any other solar panel in the world. It's absolutely the cream of the crop, and 45% more efficient than other solar panels, looks great, 25-year warranty, 120 patents is the short story. And then SunTech is what we're looking at right now. It's from China, as many solar panels are these days, but it's the premier product from China in terms of quality. And as you see, it doesn't look quite as good as the SunPower, and it certainly doesn't have the efficiency, but it's a solid product. And this is a ground mount, and you can see that if, for instance, we wanted the array to face a different direction, we'd end up having kind of long spindly legs on one side. But in this case, the array faces a similar direction to the way the land runs.
Someone wrote in a question that I was thinking of in that earlier ground mount slide is, would there be any problem with animals with the ground mount? Like that one that was like almost completely flat on the ground?
Good question. The question is, would there be any problem with animals? Typically not. There is some wiring on the back of the array, but we haven't had a problem with animals wanting to chew the wire. And the wire is tucked up neatly up underneath the solar panels. And it's a special kind of wire called USE2, and that stands for Underground Service Entrance. And it's the same kind of wire that PG&E buries directly in the ground with no conduit whatsoever. And it has chemicals in the insulation that animals don't like. So typically there's no problem. They're not attracted to it.
Do they like to sit on the panels because they're warm?
Haven't had that problem either, but it could happen. In this case, they probably slide off. I don't know. So that's a ground mount system. Okay, so far I've talked about what's called a grid-tied photovoltaic system that does not have batteries. And that's about 90% of what we do, and that's probably 95, 98% of the PV systems that are out there, you know, nationwide and in California. Now, the only thing that it won't do for you is when the grid goes down, a PV system has to shut off. And the reason for that is they don't want you putting power out on the grid and endangering people who are working to correct the outage. So it's a UL regulation, UL 1741, that the inverter has to shut off. And by the way, what you're looking at here, this is an inverter. So this is an example of a different type of system called a battery backup PV system. And it does everything that a grid-tied system does. It'll spin the meter backwards, it'll sell to the grid, it'll have environmental benefit, it'll have financial benefit, which we'll talk more about towards the end. But in addition, when the grid goes down, it will take power from a standby battery, which is right here. This is a larger type of battery, and that power will then be, it's 48 volts, that power will be used by these two separate inverters, converted to 240 volts AC, and power the home. And so this is an example of a sealed lead-acid battery plant, so there's no maintenance. This happens to be in a basement garage, so it's, not really, space was not at a premium. And in this case, it's a custom home in Saratoga where they wanted 48 hours of battery backup in the case of a grid outage. So we don't do that many battery backup systems, but we're actually very good at them. And many solar companies don't know how to do battery backup properly. It's much more complicated than a grid-tied batteryless PV system. So if your clients are interested in battery backup, it's much more expensive, anywhere between 30% and 100% more compared to a non-battery system, but it gives you the benefit of battery backup. So it's an alternative to a generator. Okay, so that's an example of a battery backup system. We do commercial systems. This is a system down in Campbell. Some of you might know Craig Daly, Daly's Drywall. And this system also is SunPower. It gives that facility a zero bill on an annual basis. In this case, it's a tilt-up on a flat roof. Sometimes we also do installations where the panels are laid flat, and I think there's a picture at the end of the presentation about that. Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, we're at questions.
Okay, so that's the first third and, sort of the general section, so I'll go ahead and open it up. If anybody has any questions, please feel free.
Okay, we've got a few that piped in. Regarding that SunTech from China over SunPower array systems from California, what's the additional price for SunPower over SunTech and others?
That's a great question. So SunPower being the premier product, it does cost more than SunTech. However, there are also economies achieved by virtue of the higher efficiency. So when you have 45% higher efficiency for a given system size, that means you have 45% less area occupied on your roof, which means that maybe you don't have to encroach on a shaded area that would have lower performance, or maybe a roof that faces a non-optimum direction. You can sort of cherry pick the roof location that gives you the most bang for the buck. And also it means less rail, less labor, and so on. So there's no clear answer. I mean, SunPower is more expensive than SunTech, but if I were to just pick a number, I would say maybe 15%, something like that. It's really not as much as you would think in order to get 45% higher efficiency. Probably part of the reason is we buy SunPower products direct because we're a licensed SunPower dealer, and so we get them direct from the manufacturer. We actually get SunTech direct as well, but I would say something like 15%.
Okay. And with regards to the battery backup system, are there additional fire protection requirements for a battery in a residential garage?
Okay, great question. When you use a sealed maintenance-free battery, such as the ones we use, there's really no issue putting it anywhere. In fact, we even put it in the living space. They are literally maintenance-free. They're sealed batteries. They can be operated upside down. They can be shipped through UPS. They're a very benign type of product. If they get recycled at the end of their life, and by the way, sealed lead-acid batteries only have a lifetime of 5 to 10 years, which is one of the reasons we don't encourage people to put in battery backup. The recycling requires very careful hazmat, facilities. And by the way, these types of batteries are virtually 100% recycled. Some people ask me, well, gee, I don't really want these kind of batteries because they have lead in them and they have acid in them. Well, they're always recycled. I mean, these batteries weigh 165 pounds each, and you'll have 30 to 100 of them. So, I mean, it's not something that a consumer would normally carry somewhere. It's something that's recycled properly. But they can be located just about anywhere. That's the short answer.
Okay. So we've got a number of questions. What's the best way to size a system? How to predict plug loads reasonably?
Great question. Sizing the system is important. You don't want too big a system or too small a system, and that's our job. So we meet with the builder, or we meet with a customer, with the client. We ask a lot of questions. If they have historical 12 months of usage, we'll use that. And we use a very complex spreadsheet that's proprietary that we've developed over the last 8.5 years to size the PV system properly for whatever goal the customer wants. If it's a zero bill, if it's an 80% reduction of the bill, if it's a zero energy usage, net zero energy home, whatever the goal is, we're very good at designing it for that goal, but it's not something that can be done casually.
Okay. We're going back to the, I think, SunTech versus SunPower. Why is it more efficient? Why is the SunPower 45% more efficient? Great
question. Why is SunPower 45% more efficient? The short answer is 120 patents. SunPower is a spin-off from Stanford University, and was developed under Dr. Richard Swanson, a Stanford professor, and then Cypress Semiconductor developed the technology further, and then eventually about 5 years ago SunPower went public, and they're now one of the largest PV providers, solar panel providers in the world. And they have an incredible array of intellectual property that gives them the additional efficiency. Everything from, there's no conductors on the front of the cell. So if you imagine a cell, which is really the horsepower of a solar panel, most cells, like the Sharp cells that we looked at pictures of, have conductors on the front. SunPower has no conductors on the front. It's just silicon, and all the conductors are on the back, and that's one of their 120 patents. They have a different semiconductor processing. They use different dopants. I think they use boron instead of phosphorus, and just things that I don't even really understand. But there's a million, well, not a million, but there's at least 120 reasons why it's more efficient, and it really is.
And how does it compare to BP panels?
Okay, BP is nothing to get excited about, and I tend to sort of say what I think, so I'll go ahead and do that. BP has been in the business a long time. Their products have had some recalls. They are average at best in terms of efficiency. You know, BP, of course, is an oil company. I give them a lot of credit for trying to get into the solar space, but I don't think that they've invested the research and development that other companies have in terms of a highly differentiated product.
Okay. Okay, so how about hailstorms and snow loads?
Great question. How durable are these panels? So almost every solar panel on the market is guaranteed to not break with with a 1-inch diameter hailstone impact in a 52-mile-per-hour wind. So that's, if you think about it, a 1-inch diameter hailstone is a pretty hard impact, and they have to pass a test where they can't break. So they're pretty durable. People ask, well, what about like balls and children and things like that? And what I usually say is, we almost never have solar panels break. You know, I think a tennis ball, absolutely no problem. A volleyball should be fine. A golf ball probably will break it if it's hit high enough or hard enough. We've only had, I think, we've put in many, probably tens of thousands of solar panels over 8.5 years. I think we've only had 2 of them break, and they were both because of tree limbs. So typically when you have a windstorm and you have a tree that overhangs your roof, which really is not a good idea anyway, you know, it's going to get broken. And then in terms of snow, it needs to be designed for the proper snow load.
Okay. Right. So here's a question, and maybe you'll discuss this as we go further, but what progress, if any, is being made to remedy the problem of the toxicity of the PV production process, and is this a priority?
Okay, a question about the PV production process and the environmental impact. I'm not an expert in this area. I'm sure that there are toxic elements present in the manufacture, particularly of the cells, which is basically a semiconductor process, same as the chips that are in your computer. I've heard that and this is not really a question about energy payback, but a point of interest, I've heard that the energy payback of a solar panel is about 2 years, 2 to 2.25 years, depending on the particular panel. So the energy it took to produce a panel and, ship it and make the glass and make the aluminum and make the silicon is paid back in about 2 to 2.25 years out in the sunshine, is what I've heard. In terms of the toxicity, I think that's just a fact of life. It is enclosed in a factory, so I don't think it impacts consumers. And in terms of what's being done, I honestly don't know.
Okay, a question from Joe here. What is the power loss due to the distance from the panels to the inverter for systems mounted remotely? Also, is it better to put the inverter close to the panels or close to the meter?
Okay, great question about power loss through the wiring. So every system we install, it's custom designed. We design it for the specific case, for the homeowner, for the business, for the roof, for the ground, for the electric bill, and for the budget. And we always design for less than 1% total wiring loss. And that means we pick whatever appropriate size of copper gives us that 1% or less wiring loss. Now, in terms of where to put the inverter, you can put the inverter at the array, in which case the DC run is very short and then the AC run is long, or you can put the inverter at the house, in which case the DC run is long and the AC is short. It's generally better to have a long DC run because the DC voltage is higher. The DC voltage is in the range of 300 to 500 volts DC. It's enclosed in metallic conduit, so it's not a safety issue. But as you engineers out there know, power is voltage times current, and so power loss is also voltage times current. And when you have a higher voltage, you have a lower current, and your power is I squared R. So in engineering talk, you're reducing your I squared R loss by shipping a higher voltage the long distance.
Great answer. Okay, back to batteries here. Are there other battery types with longer lifespan?
There are. So that's a great question. The two major categories of batteries are sealed lead acid, which is what we talked about before, and flooded batteries. And flooded batteries are designed specifically for solar, and flooded means that you have to have maintenance on them. You have to check the electrolyte level. You have to get out your hydrometer and check the specific gravity. You can only put in distilled water. You have to equalize them every month or two, which is a strong charging cycle to stir up the electrolyte. And so flooded batteries are typically used for off-grid homes where they really need the best battery that you can get. And flooded batteries are long-lived, so they can last up to 20, 25 years if you take care of them. But that's a very key point. You have to take care of them. And many homeowners in a suburban environment really just have busy lives, and they just don't have time to worry about it. So that's why we use the maintenance-free batteries, even though they have a shorter lifetime. A flooded battery will give you great service if you take care of it.
Okay. And a follow-up question, have there been any problems with the battery backup?
No, not really. They're more complex than a non-battery system, but if they're designed properly, they work exactly right.
Okay. All right. Are there any situations where the owner gets paid by the utility for excess power generated per year, and then also commercial?
Okay, that's a great question. Why don't I defer that to when we get to the time of use, which is coming up real soon, and I'll address that.
Okay, and then I'm just going to answer these, or we're just going to do these last two, and then we should move on. So lifespan of panels, is that something?
Right, so a good quality solar panel, like a SunPower, will have a 25-year power output warranty. And so that means the manufacturer is warranting to you that the solar panel will produce typically 80% of its rated power at the end of year 25 and 90% at the end of year 10. And that's all. When we do a proposal to a customer, though, that degradation is in the numbers already. It's basically 1% a year. It's pretty darn good.
How about microinverters? I'm assuming this is a follow-up from the same person, so I'm assuming it's lifespan.
Right. So microinverters are a complex subject. I'll give you my short answer, and we can move on. And then at the end, if anybody wants to talk more about microinverters, I'm happy to. We do not offer microinverters. Microinverters are a trend in the industry where instead of a centralized inverter on the side of your house that'll service the whole PV array, you'll have a small inverter under each solar panel. And so, like, let's say you have, at the end, I'm going to give you some examples of actual systems and how much they cost. And the example I'm quoting is a 36-panel sun power system, which is 8.1 kilowatts. So instead of one inverter on the side of the house, you would have 36 inverters up on the roof. And I worry, you know, I'm an engineer. I've designed product for many years, and I worry about the reliability of 36 microinverters up on the roof in a harsh environment. And I'm just not quite sure it's ready for prime time yet. So even though they're getting a lot of marketing buzz, we have not chosen to we have chosen to not adopt microinverters.
Okay, I'm going to allow this one last question. If you are off the grid, what kind of battery backup is best?
Now, when you say off the grid, you mean no grid connection whatsoever. So if you're off the grid, by definition, that means your batteries are being exercised a lot. Every day, the battery will be charged up. Every night, it will be discharged. Not all the way, but some percentage. And that requires a different battery chemistry than a standby application, which is sort of the suburban environment. And so you want a flooded lead acid or lead calcium battery if you're off grid.
Okay.
Right.
All right. So we're gonna go back to presentation mode.
Great questions, everybody.
Yeah, really good question.
Okay, time check 11:15. So
we're okay. We're a little over, but we'll make it all up.
We'll make it all up. Okay. So I'm going to keep this one real short. Here's an overview of Cobalt, my company. We've done about 700 systems throughout the Bay Area. We're happy to help you with your client needs. We do all of our own installations. We are, as I mentioned, SunPower residential dealer and SunPower commercial dealer and authorized SunTech dealer, Diamond certified. We do everything in-house, and we do a lot of work in the community to build knowledge about PV systems. We routinely go to career days at local high schools and actually hire high school students for internships, summer internships, and have done grid alternatives work and things like that. So that's a kind of a brief snapshot of us. Okay, so let's talk about time of use metering, and I'm going to go through this a little bit quickly, but this is a wonderful example of things don't happen in life very often where something just works out perfectly in our favor, and this is an example of one that did. So PG&E has had a rate schedule for electricity called time of use for many, many years, and it basically allows you to have a rate schedule where in the summertime, and hopefully you can see my arrow here, the summertime is defined as May through October in PG&E lingo. So in the summertime, you can select a rate schedule where during the peak time, which is 1 to 7, Monday through Friday, you pay an exorbitant amount for electricity. And then during the off-peak time, which is all the other times, you get really cheap electricity. And why would you want to do this? So if you had a home and you did not have solar and you switched over to time of use, which you can do, you're eligible for it, your bill would go up because you get killed by those peak charges. And by the way, the numbers I'm showing here, 30 cents per kilowatt hour and 10 cents per kilowatt hour, are just an approximation, and it's actually not accurate, but the basic concept is accurate. About a 3-to-1 ratio of on-peak to off-peak. Well, if you didn't have solar, this would not be beneficial generally, but if you do have solar, it's an absolute no-brainer because during the afternoon, where's my mouse? During the day, you're going to generate your own power. So you're going to avoid those high charges. And in fact, if your meter spins backwards, which it will most afternoons, they're going to pay you the high rate. When your meter's spinning backwards, the utility must pay you the retail rate. That's California law. And then furthermore, at nighttime when you don't have any sunlight and you're buying power from PG&E, you're buying really cheap electricity. So you literally sell high and buy low. And this gives you a great, what I call magnification effect, which you'll see in a minute, where you can put in a smaller system and have a bigger effect on your bill. For instance, let's say you wanted a zero bill, which is 100% reduction of your bill in terms of dollars. You can put in typically around a PV system that generates about 70% of your kilowatt hours on an annual basis and have 100% reduction of your bill. And that's because of this magnification effect, sell high, buy low. In the wintertime, the rates are low. There is no peak charges. It's only off-peak and partial peak. And that, again, is advantageous because in the wintertime we get weather. And if you had a peak time in the winter and you had a rainstorm come in or cloudy days or something like that, you'd be paying those peak charges. So in the wintertime, your PV system doesn't produce quite as much, and we do get weather, and so this is like a tailor-made rate schedule for people with solar. Now, remember that the peak time is 1 to 7, and so you really would like that PV system to produce like crazy in the afternoon. And that means what? That means you'd like to phase between south and west. And so there's a little tip for you architects and designers out there. When you're laying out your house, if your client wants a PV system, try to identify a roof surface or a ground location where they have good exposure, sort of midday and afternoon, and you'll get the most bang for your buck. East-facing works, but not as well as west-facing. And then there was another question about producing excess power. So on a daily basis, you can produce all the power you want. You can crank that meter backwards like crazy, and you build up a credit with PG&E. Now, on an annual basis, you don't want to produce more typically than, you don't want to try to go beyond a zero bill because they will pay you peanuts beyond a zero bill.
It's like 4 cents or something. It's
4 cents per kilowatt hour roughly, and that's the short answer. So typically a zero bill is sort of the sweet spot.
And so for those that are outside of PG&E territory, is there anything that they would want to contact their utility about? Because I know we have some folks in Southern California and elsewhere. Municipal.
Right. So every utility is different. You know, in the Bay Area here, Palo Alto, CPAU, City of Palo Alto Utilities, and City of Santa Clara is Silicon Valley Power, and I believe Alameda has their own utility. You know, you'll have to talk to the utilities about it. Typically, they do not have time of use. In Southern California, I think some of them do and some of them don't. This is really specific to PG&E.
Okay.
Okay. So that's the sell high, buy low scenario for time of use metering. Let's talk about financial incentives for a minute. In California, there's a California Solar Initiative which started at $2.50 a watt, and the program was designed as more and more people put in solar, the rate per watt goes down. So we're now down to 25 cents a watt, so we've declined 90%. And in fact, it'll go to zero within the next 6 months to 12 months. And that's by design, but it's heavily oversubscribed. It was supposed to be an 8-year program, and this CSI program has been going about 4 years now. And it's because PV is so popular, which you'll see in a minute. You just make so much money. It is so financially attractive and, you know, also environmentally beneficial that it's oversubscribed. The New Solar Homes is a different rebate program, also California, and it is only for homes that exceed Title 24 by 15%. And some of you know Title 24 is the energy efficiency regulations for California. So typically it's pretty hard for an existing home to exceed Title 24 by 15%, and so this is mostly new homes. And we do new solar homes every day, and as you can see, the rebate level is $2.25 a watt, so it's 9 times higher than the 9 times as high as the CSI. So it's a wonderful rebate program, but it requires a ton of paperwork, and it requires that Title 24 plus 15% overall home efficiency. So something to think about if you're building a new home and you want to put PV on there, you can get a killer rebate, and you'll see a specific example of both a CSI and a New Solar Homes at the end of the presentation with pricing, and it gives you a great bang for the buck.
Can it be existing homes?
It can be.
Okay.
It can be.
But like for those of you that are pursuing Energy Upgrade California type of rebates, you know, I think to consider that program, you have to be 15% above.
Right.
So, you know, if you're doing energy efficiency upgrades to your home and you want to add solar electric,
absolutely,
it's good to know about that.
Yes, I believe it will apply to an existing home if you can meet that 15% threshold. And by the way, the appliances all have to be Energy Star if they're provided by the builder. If the homeowner buys their own appliances, they can be anything. This is one of the many requirements of this New Solar Homes program. Then there's a great federal tax credit. It's 30%. It's part of the stimulus bill, so people love hearing that they're getting their part of that that stimulus bill that came out a few years ago. And there's no cap. So, for instance, if you do a battery backup system, the government's paying 30% of it. and it's not subject to alternative minimum tax. Doesn't matter how much money you make, you get that tax credit no matter what. And then we already talked about time of use metering. We'll talk about renewable energy credits on the next page. And then for commercial systems, you are allowed to depreciate your system. That means write off your system in an accelerated manner. And even though these systems typically have a 25-year lifetime, you can literally write off the whole system in 6 years for both California and federal. This is only for commercial systems because homeowners are not allowed to depreciate anything. You literally are, even though you're writing it off in 6 years, it's front-end loaded. You're actually writing off 60% of it in year 1. And in this calendar year only, 2011, which I probably shouldn't tell you because we're almost done with 2011, you literally get to write off 100% of the system in 1 year. It's a special, it's called bonus depreciation. But anyway, the short answer is, 6-year write-off for the whole system, even though you have a useful life of 25 plus years. So that's accelerated depreciation. And by the way, I mentioned earlier, sometimes we do commercial systems that are mounted flat. Here's an example on the right of a system we have in San Carlos that is a flat mount on the roof. Okay, so that's financial incentives. So let's talk just for a minute about RECs. I'm going to kind of breeze through this. RECs, renewable energy credits, and some of you out there might know more about it than I do, are a tradable commodity, and they represent the environmental benefit of a renewable energy system. So in addition to saving money on your bill, getting a federal tax credit, getting a California rebate, all these other advantages of having a PV system, you may or may not also be able to sell your RECs. And why are RECs important? Well, in many states, there's something called a renewable portfolio standard. And in California, we have one of the hardest, toughest renewable portfolio standards in the nation. The utilities have to get 33% of their energy from renewables by 2020. And this applies to all of the investor-owned utilities, Southern California Gas and Electric, Edison, PG&E. So they're currently, I know PG&E is about 17% right now. I'm not sure where the Southern California utilities are, but they got a ways to go. And so they can put in a ton of solar or a ton of wind or a ton of fuel cells, or they can buy RECs from somebody else who has solar and wind. And so, a little homeowner can have a little 4, 5, 6, 8 kilowatt system, 10, 20 kilowatt system, whatever, and once the California Public Utilities Commission authorizes RECs to be traded, that homeowner can sell his or her RECs to whomever wants to buy them, and it might be the utility. So, when we get a little further on, we're going to talk about owning a system versus leasing a system. So here's a great reason to own a system, because the CPUC has ruled that the owners get the RECs. So if you lease your system, the advantage is you'll see you can do it for literally $0 down, but one of the disadvantages is you don't get the RECs. The leasing company gets the RECs.
How soon do you think it's going to come to California?
Well, that's a good question. It's a political question. The CPUC, unfortunately, is somewhat closely allied with the utilities. Picking my words carefully here. So there's some question whether they will move forward aggressively on RECs or whether they won't. The other side of the coin, you could argue that the utilities really need RECs, because otherwise they're going to be laying out a lot of capital expenditures to put in solar and other things. But here's some examples of states where RECs are actively traded today. New Jersey is leading the pack, 60 cents per kilowatt hour. So a little further on, we'll talk about an 8 kilowatt example. So that might generate in New Jersey $7,000 a year of income to whoever owns the solar system, and that's forever. So that's pretty significant. Now, of course, these are tradable, so they might go up, they might go down. Honestly, they probably will go down. Massachusetts and Maryland are a couple other examples. But RECs are coming to California, and we don't know what they'll be worth yet and when they'll be available. But I would say my guess would be a couple years from now, and I just honestly don't know what the number will be. Something to think about. So that's RECS. Okay, I guess another break.
Okay. Let's see. Okay. Okay, so we'll give a minute to see if there's any questions. I think we answered a lot of the at the front end of this.
Right.
So yeah, we'll just take a few minutes to see if there's any questions. Well, I had a comment that, I mean, I think it's a different system in Europe, but I know that people in Germany and Japan are, like buy oversized systems for that express purpose is to sell the energy, but I guess it's not really called a REC, really.
Yeah, so Michelle is asking about something called a feed-in tariff, and at the risk of getting slightly political here, countries like Germany have made a conscious decision that solar is beneficial to their culture and to their society. And so Germany in particular has been the #1 market for at least the last 5 or 6 years for solar worldwide. And many of you know that Germany is not a very good place for solar. It's far north and it's cloudy a lot of the time. But they have something called a feed-in tariff where it's, federal law. Whoever generates renewable energy, typically from solar, they will pay this amount per kilowatt hour, period, end of story. There's none of this nonsense of, can you overproduce or not overproduce or anything. Whatever kilowatt hours you produce, they will pay you, and they make it worth your while. And so that's why Germany is the #1 market in the world, and that's why Germany is, becoming much, much less dependent on oil and on natural gas and on fossil fuels. Unfortunately, in America, we don't quite have that vision, or we may have the vision, but we don't have the reality.
Right.
So the feed-in tariff does not exist in the U.S. on a federal level. If it did, boy, buy your solar stock right now because it'll go through the roof. California is talking about a feed-in tariff. We'll see if it happens, but it's a different structure.
Okay, we do have a few questions that came in. RECs would be paid literally with a check to the owner?
Correct.
Excitedly?
Yep, that's correct. RECs will be paid directly from the purchaser to the owner, and it's typically monthly or quarterly. And there are third-party organizations springing up who are basically middlemen, and they will handle the transaction for you. And it's typically done electronically, instead of an actual check. But it's a recurring payment, just like any other recurring payment.
Okay, and then question, are damaged panels typically covered with the homeowner's insurance policy?
Yes, they typically are. So most people who put in a PV system on their home, they call their agent, they say, okay, I'm putting in a PV system. The insurance agent says, ho-hum, great, it's covered, no problem.
So it's not something you need to add?
Typically not. It depends on the policy, but typically not. I put one on my system 9 years ago, and my agent said, yeah, no big deal.
Okay.
A deductible applies.
Okay. So let's stop Q&A right now, and we'll head back to the presentation.
Okay.
Final Q&A.
Great question. So now we're going to move into sort of an overview of how much does it cost, what is the return on investment, how much are those incentives really good for me, do I want to own it or do I want to lease it? And so there's a lot of numbers, and what I suggest is just go for the big picture, don't try to write down every little number. And of course, every system is different. This is sort of a typical, sort of best case typical example. So I'm going to show you, go ahead.
I was going to say as a reminder, so for the Build It Green members, the webinar will be posted on our website as well as the PowerPoint. So that's a member benefit and a plug for Build It Green membership.
Great, thanks. Okay, so I'm going to show you 3 examples, and all 3 of them are the same PV system, and it's an 8.1 kilowatt system. And by the way, STC, the term STC means standard test conditions. There's about 5 different ways to measure the size of a PV system, and this is something that people always get kind of wrapped around the axle about. And this is nameplate rating. So in other words, if you take 36 modules of sun power of 225 watts each, you multiply 36 times 225, I think it's about 8,000 watts. So that's a nameplate rating nomenclature, STC, standard test conditions. This is an example of a homeowner who has a $400 a month bill before he got solar. This particular system will reduce his kilowatt hours by 76% on an annual basis and will reduce his bill by 92% on an annual basis. So why the difference? Well, there again, that's that magnification effect. Time of use, sell high, buy low. So this would be a south-facing array, I think down the bottom, south-facing 5 and 12 comp roof, not much shading. It's kind of a best case, but realistic example. System might cost about $47,000. You might get about $15,000 from California, and by the way, this is CSI. So we're going to do CSI, we're going to do the new solar homes, which is the much higher rebate, and these are both a purchase, and the third example is a lease. And so you can see which one you like more. Some people like the purchase, some people like the lease. They're both very, very good way to go. So, net price after your California rebating federal tax credit, about $31K. Now, how much do you save on your electric bill? Well, over 25 years, which I know is a long time, you'll save about $233,000 on your electric bill. And these are real dollars, and it assumes that PG&E goes up 5.4%, down the bottom here, 5.4% per year. This is the average rate of increase for the last 39 years of PG&E, and that's why we use that number. It's a real-world number. Nobody knows what the future will hold, but that's what it's done for the last, ever since 1970. So I think it's a reasonable estimate, maybe even conservative. So you save a bunch of money over the next 25 years. Where do you break even? You break even at 5.9 years. So the first 5.9 years, you're basically paying off your system with your savings. After year 5.9, after year 6, you're home free electricity for life. What kind of a return on investment is that giving you? Here's really the punchline. It's a 24% per year return on investment, tax-free. And we can go through the numbers in more detail. Any of you who either don't believe it or you want clarification, give me a call. The last slide has my contact information. I'd be happy to run through the numbers with you. But if you know anything about investments, you know that tax-free investments like muni bonds and T-bills are paying about 1 or 2% right now. And this is a pretty incredible return. So we have people literally take money out of their 401ks, out of their IRAs to buy PV systems because they recognize, they do their homework, and they recognize that it is such an incredible investment.
Are you saying in general that the ROI would be 24%, or is it really case by case? Will that ROI be different for different case studies and scenarios?
It's absolutely case by case, but in PG&E territory or similar rate schedules, in other words, not, for instance, in Palo Alto, which has really cheap electricity. For most cases that we see, it's anywhere between 20% and 30% is very typical return on investment per year. Okay, so it adds a bunch of value to your home, and we have an article that we give out to people from the Appraisal magazine, and that's because people like to buy energy-efficient homes. And people ask me, do you really believe that? And I say, well, it depends on the buyer, but if the panels look good, if they're well-designed, if they're good quality, like the nice all-black SunPower, and especially if it could be on the back of the house or on the side roof of the house, I absolutely believe it. Why wouldn't you rather buy a bill where let's see, what's 8% of $400? That's like $34 a month. Why wouldn't you rather have a $34 a month electric bill instead of $400? Absolutely, you would. And people more and more have an environmental eye towards many of their purchases, including their homes. If it's on the front of the house and it's right over the front door, it depends on the homeowner. It depends on the buyer. Some people will be attracted to it. Some people will say not in a million years. So, depends on the buyer. Now, that's if you purchase it. Now, this example right here where it says positive cash flow, what if you took a home equity line of credit that you already had and you used that to buy your PV system and then you paid off your home equity line of credit over 15 years in a fully amortized manner? Well, it's pretty incredible. You're having positive cash flow from day one. So, in other words, the money you save on your electric bill is way more than what it costs you to service your loan, principal and interest. And so in the first year, you put $2,190 in your pocket, and that's tax-free. Second year, it's like $2,300. Third year, it's like $2,500. It just keeps going up. And over 25 years, you saved you made $190,000 of profit, and you didn't take a penny out of your pocket. Well, that's a pretty good investment. RECs, who knows what happens? I just put a question mark. Depends on whether they become valuable or not. And then in terms of environmental benefit, this exact system will prevent about 360,000 pounds of carbon dioxide from being emitted over 25 years, and that's based upon the California mix of energy sources. We get over 50% of our electricity from burning natural gas, and that's equivalent to planting about 12,000 trees. So that's a pretty good environmental benefit. And I know 25 years is a long time, but you can derate it linearly. Maybe you think you might sell your house in 10 years. Well, it's going to be half of that or a little bit less. So it's a wonderful environmental benefit. So that's example one if you purchase your system and if it's a CSI rebate. So maybe I'll just stop for a minute. Do we have any questions on that?
We should probably just keep going.
Just keep going. Okay. I've been told to keep going. So we only have 2 more slides and then we're done. So case 2 is the same system, but it's a new solar homes rebate. So remember here you broke even in 5.9 years and you had about a 24% ROI. So here's the next one. 8.1 kilowatt system, same $400 bill, new solar homes rebate. Remember I told you that one is much higher. Here you break even in 4.3 years and you're getting a 35% per year ROI. Pretty incredible investment. It's the same system. You save the same money on your PG&E bill. It costs the same amount. Has the same environmental benefit. And the RECs, same question mark. So even better with the new solar homes. Okay, so that's case 2. Now here's case 3, which is new solar homes, but if you lease it. So here's an example, same 8.1 kilowatt system, $400 bill, new solar homes rebate, but you, instead of owning your system, you lease your system. So I'm going to go over the numbers briefly, and then I'll come back and talk about leases in general. It doesn't cost you a penny. You don't spend a penny. You're paying PG&E about $37 per month instead of $400. That's actually the same number you would have done if you purchased it. You're paying the lease company about $95 a month. So you're saving what's 95 plus 37 is about 132. So you're saving from 400 down to 132. You're saving about $270 per month. You didn't spend a penny. You don't save as much as you saved on the previous example. Here you're saving $113K over 25 years. Previously you saved $233K. So, not quite the biggest bang, as big a bang as if you purchase it, but you didn't spend any money. Break even day 1 because you didn't spend any money. And we'll talk about the optional buyout in a minute. Increase in home value the same, environmental benefit the same. RECs, 0. You don't get RECs if you lease your system. So leasing a PV system is a strong movement in the marketplace and in the industry. This started 2 or 3 years ago, and it's probably the majority of PV sales today is a lease. We offer both a purchase and a lease. Many of our competitors only offer a lease. You have to be careful. So there's a number of different leases out there. Most of the leases out there do not ever allow you to purchase your system. So you go ahead and you sign a 20-year lease, and you really have no off-ramp. And you have the only way you can get out of it is if you die or you sell your home. And if you sell your home, you have to get the buyer to be qualified for the lease, because the PV system is already on your roof. And if he or she cannot qualify, you got a problem. You can't sell it to them. This particular lease that we offer is a SunPower lease. SunPower has teamed up with Citibank, and it has numerous advantages over other leases, one of which is it gives you the right to buy out your system in year 6. Why is year 6 important? Well, remember I told you that the federal government and California allows you to do accelerated depreciation. And so the lease company writes off they own your system on your roof, and they write it off through year 6. And so after year 6, they're willing to let it go because they can't write it off. They've written off 100% of it. So you can literally, let's say that RECs all of a sudden become very valuable in California. You have the legal right to buy your system in year 6, and that's how much it'll cost you. So this is the only lease I know of that gives you an off-ramp at the end of year 6. And there's numerous other differences as well, but you know, I don't want to go into a sales mode here. But something to think about if you're leasing is read the fine print, because a lot of them have very onerous conditions to leasing your system if anything happens. So that's a lease, and we reviewed 2 examples of purchase, and I think we are done. Yeah, so I'm going to leave this up there for a minute, and then we'll have another Q&A session. There's some good information at our website, cobaltpower.com. How come my mouse isn't working? Anyway, cobaltpower.com, and you can also give me a call. That's my phone number there, or send me an email. Be happy to answer questions or talk about anything in more detail. So thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. And I will, I guess the next slide is Q&A, but I'll go ahead and leave the slide up there.
That's great. Okay, yes, we got some questions already in, and folks, you know, we've got 15 minutes still left on the webinar, so please keep sending those in. Okay, so we've got Zeke asked, what is a case study for $100 a month PG&E bill? For the first example that you gave. Right, great example. So sometimes people ask, does it make sense for me to put in solar? And the answer honestly is, the bigger your bill, the more incredible your return is. So I gave an example of a $400 a month bill before solar. That's sort of the midpoint for the systems we do. We put in systems for people that have $2,000 a month electric bill, wow. $3,000 a month electric bill. We do lots of systems for people that have $800 a month electric bill, $400, $300. If you're below 100, you're probably going to be doing it for environmental reasons rather than for financial reasons. Because in PG&E territory, you have a tiered rate schedule, and you know, you're probably mostly at baseline or tier 2, where electricity is sort of inexpensive. And so you're replacing somewhat inexpensive electricity, and it's going to take you longer to break even. So where you saw that 4 to 5 year break even, if you had a $100 a month bill, it might be more like 7, 8 years, 9 even, depending on which direction your array faces. So we usually say above 100, it gets interesting. Above 200, it's compelling. Yeah, because especially, I mean, you're basing the increase on 5.4 increase, but, you know, many people believe that the cost of all electricity is going to be higher. It's going to happen faster than that. Right. Higher. Okay, so we got a question. How is home value increased with a lease system? It doesn't get sold with the home. Okay, that's a good question. I would think it's equivalent because the effect on your bill is equivalent. In other words, instead of a $400 a month bill, you have a $37 a month bill or whatever the number was, whether you're leasing or buying. So I think it's similar. Well, I guess it would be less because you still have to pay the leasing company too. Let's go back to that example. So here, it's true you're paying a $37 a month bill to the utility, but you're also paying a $95 per month bill to the leasing company. So you would ask the question, is the increase in home value the same? And I would say that's a pretty good question. Maybe it's not the same. That's a good question. Okay. I mean, it seems like it would, because the new owner has to take over the lease, and so their bill is not going to be $400. It's going to be whatever, $140. Right. So right. Seems like it. Yeah. Good question, though. Okay. All right. Do you have an example if you're paying a flat rate, say 14 cents per kilowatt? Okay. Most commercial rate schedules are flat rate, and in PG&E territory, they range between 8 cents per kilowatt hour and 15 or 16 cents per kilowatt hour. And in that case, well, the answer can be lengthy or short. Comparing a residential system with a commercial system, there are numerous differences. First of all, the rate tends to be lower on the commercial system. So 14 cents per kilowatt hour is a great middle-of-the-road example for a commercial rate schedule. Now, you get to depreciate your system, as we talked about, and so that gives you a big upside. But you also, before you ever put in solar, you deduct your energy costs from your income before you pay your taxes. So that gives you a downside.
So, we have all this covered in our spreadsheet that we use. It's our proposal tool, and each example is different, but it's pretty much equally compelling for commercial systems that have flat rate schedules and for residential systems. And by the way, there is also a time of use rate schedule for commercial systems, just like we talked about for residential systems, and it's called A6.
Okay. Great. We have a question from Cedric here. With an ownership scenario, is there typically any guarantee on production, as there is often with a lease?
Right. The answer is no. These systems are incredibly reliable, and we typically do not offer a guarantee on production. We just don't think it's necessary. If a system is installed properly and has good quality panels and good quality inverter, it's going to produce. And we have some really nice monitoring systems that we offer for a very modest additional amount of money, in the order of hundreds of dollars. And it allows you to look at your system any time of day or night, any location, any computer, anywhere in the world, through the internet. You can log on and look at your system and see what it's producing. And it also allows you to monitor how much you're buying or selling from or to the utility. And that's a lot of fun. You can see when your meter's going backwards, when it isn't. And so as long as somebody keeps an eye on their system, they either work or they don't. And if they're broken, which doesn't happen very often, you have a 10-year bumper-to-bumper warranty from us, and we will come out and fix it. And if it isn't broken, it's probably producing according to design.
Does the monitoring, do you offer monitoring with leasing? And then if somebody owns it, do they pay for that, or how does that work?
So leasing has to have monitoring, and that's because the leasing company wants to watch the lease. So with a lease, the leasing company is responsible for keeping an eye on your system. So therefore, it has to have monitoring, because they're not going to come out and look at your inverter. With the ownership, you, the homeowner, are responsible for monitoring your system. And it can be as simple as looking at your inverter once every 2 or 3 weeks and just making sure you have a green light on during the day. Really, that is sufficient. Or more and more, people like to have a remote monitor, like I talked about a minute ago, where you can sit at a computer at work or in Hawaii or in Hong Kong or wherever you are and log in through the internet, and you can look at your system real time and, oh, look, right now we're producing 4.2 kilowatts, and we're spinning our meter backwards and selling 1.8 kilowatts of that to the utility. So more and more people like monitoring systems, and we do definitely offer and encourage people to have us install a monitoring system. The one we like a lot is $785, and it includes both PV generation as well as the utility connection, the utility feed, so you can see how much your whole house is using or your business, and whether you're spinning your meter backwards or forwards.
Okay, great. Good to know. Okay, so what is the ideal orientation and slope for PV panels? That's question one. How much is efficiency reduced if panels are off? Optimal orientation slope. That's 2. And third is, what if arrays are partially shaded at certain times of the day?
Great question. So in terms of the direction of facing, south facing is the best in the northern hemisphere, where we are here, California, because it will give you full exposure morning to night. If you're going to be off of south facing, you generally want to be west when you have time of use rate schedules. And if you don't have a time of use rate schedules, east and west are equivalent. So sort of the absolute pure optimum is about south by southwest, because it'll catch sun the whole day, but it'll really crank in the afternoon if you have time of use. In terms of tilt angle, it's really not very critical. There's something called orientation slope factor, which is a number between 0 and 1, and it takes into account the azimuth, which is the direction facing, and the tilt angle. South facing 7 and 12 here in the Bay Area is 1.0, so that's the best you can get. But south facing 4 and 12, you builders know that's an 18.4 degree slope. That's 0.97. So a 4 and 12 roof is only 3% lower than a 7 and 12 roof. Even 5 and 12, 3 and 12, 6 and 12, it just doesn't matter too much. Even completely flat is 0.89. So you only lose 11% from the optimum and maybe like 6 or 7% from the typical if you put them completely flat on a flat roof. So it just is not very critical. But we take all this into account when we quote a system.
Okay, great. Okay, do the PV module or any electrical equipment qualify for appliance rebate, and is there a cap on total cost of rebates?
No, they don't. What they qualify for is the CSA, California Solar Initiative rebate, or the new solar homes rebate. There's no appliance rebate. There's no cap. I believe it's on the CSI, it's up to 1 megawatt. On the new solar homes, there is a cap. It was recently introduced. It used to be no cap. It's now 7.5 kilowatt. You can put in a system bigger than that, but you'll only get a rebate up to 7.5 kilowatt. And by the way, I just remembered that I failed to answer the previous question about shading. So you really don't want to put a solar array, a PV array, in a location where it has significant shading. Occasional shading, maybe a telephone pole sweeping through the array, or maybe late afternoon or early morning shading is fine, but it's sort of a waste of money to put an expensive PV array in a place where it has significant shading. So we typically try to avoid that. But if there is shade, every system we put in, we measure the shading before we quote the system using a calibrated optical instrument up on the roof, and that's in the numbers. So whatever the system is going to do is already captured and accurately modeled in the proposal.
Okay. We have a question from Michael here. I have clients that have low electrical bills but consider PV for environmental reasons. If they were to change appliances to electric clothes dryer, hot water heater, house heating, do you see the electrical bill making the system work much better financially?
Great question. In general, we do not recommend using electricity to heat water or to do space heat. It just takes a huge amount of electricity. And you might think kind of theoretically that it would be a good idea to put in a big PV system and then maybe have an electric water heater or even heat your swimming pool with electricity or whatever. But just in general, that will swamp out the PV system so much that you're still going to be buying a lot of power from the utility. Natural gas is a very concentrated form of energy, and and I personally believe that natural gas will probably not be going up significantly in price over the next few decades. Who knows? But that's just my 2 cents worth. I think electricity may. So in general, we don't recommend putting a huge number of appliances on electricity that may be better served by natural gas. Like pool heat, we never recommend heating your pool with electricity. Water heat, we generally recommend using natural gas. I think a dryer could go either way. I usually tell people just stick with the dryer you've got. When you need to buy a new one, you may want to get an electric one, more for environmental reasons than for financial reasons.
Space heating, I know that in Japan, and they use the mini splits and ductless mini splits, and that's a super efficient system.
Right.
So it's worth checking out. It is expensive.
Right. So that's a good point Michelle is raising. The other thing is heat pumps. Heat pumps are a wonderful way to heat your home, and they're environmentally beneficial, and they work great, but they are really expensive.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Okay, question from Z. What happens if after the installation of the solar panel on existing roof, I need to replace the roof under the panels, let's say 10 years later?
Great question. When we do what we call our site visit, which is where we meet with the customer and we measure the roof and measure the shading and have a little dialogue about what their goals are for their system so that we can custom design the system to satisfy their needs, we always evaluate the condition of the roof. And if the roof only has a few years left on it, we will recommend that they replace the roof before they put on the PV system. We have, on about half a dozen cases, had people put on a PV system, and then later on they decided to put a new roof, and we removed the solar panel array from the roof, store it in the garage, and then they put a new roof on, and then we come back and put it back up there. It costs usually a few $1,000s.
Okay. And a question here from Richard. Did you say that the monitoring system can be viewed remotely, like on an iPhone?
Yes. So some of the monitoring systems have a really nice app on the iPhone or on an Android device where you can literally be sitting on the bus or on the train or on the airplane. Well, I guess not on the airplane, wherever you are, and you can pull up your PV system and look on your iPhone and see what it's doing. It's really fun.
Cool. And a question from Michael here. Will there be much higher efficiency systems coming within the next few years, meaning more watts generated per panel?
I personally don't think so. If you look at the curve of efficiency versus time, you've seen that in the early days, The systems were not very efficient. They made great strides. They and SunPower in particular has gotten to the point where they've really, every time they come out with a new model, it's very small incrementally. It might be 1% better, something like that. And I've heard that the theoretical limit is, not that much higher than where we are today. So I think the answer is no, they're not going to be dramatic strides in efficiency.
Okay. So it's like, so it's not worth it to wait a couple years.
Right. And meanwhile, the rebates continue to go down, and meanwhile, you continue to spend a lot of money on your utility bill.
You mentioned the CSI rebate. You said that you think that's going to go down to 0 in about 6 months?
Yeah, I would say probably a year. Typically, it has taken a notch down every 9 months, if you look at the history. Okay. And it's only got one step more to go, and then it's at the end.
Okay. All right. Well, I don't see any questions that have been unanswered at this point, but we will stay on the call for a few more minutes, but let me just give you some of my final announcements. I know you answered a lot of questions. I think you get the award for the most webinar questions answered. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
My pleasure.
And so I want to thank Mark for coming out here today. It was really great. I learned a lot. I hope everybody else did. Just want to bring people's attention. We hope you join us for our next webinar. We won't have a webinar in November, but we will be having one in December, and it's on LED. It's an LED product demonstration, and this might be the first time ever it's happening on a webinar, not live. But we have Tal Mashadian from Lightline Illumination, and he'll be with us on Wednesday, December 14th. So we hope that you'll join us then. And again, if you have any questions for me, Build It Green, you can email me at guild@builditgreen, and then there's Mark's contact info as well. We all hope you found this information very helpful, and we want to thank Mark again for coming out. And so the webinar is officially ended, so folks are welcome to go, and if you have any remaining questions, we'll stay on the webinar for a few minutes. Okay. I had a question. Have you heard of canopy mount?
I think I have. What is it?
Well, instead of having the roof mount where the flash like flashing is traditionally done around like venting pipes and things like that, where the roof flashing goes around it.
Right.
This is with Solar City has a canopy mount where they go through the roof, and I guess it's some sort of gel, but that's what they do, because I guess they're putting on a lot of systems on existing roofs.
Right.
So I don't know if you've heard
of it. I think I have heard of it, but I'm not familiar with it.
Okay. And does your company have size limits? Like, as you said, like if somebody had is there a minimum size?
No, not really. No, we're most of the work we do is larger than about 3 or 4 kilowatt, which would be about a $125 a month, $150 a month bill and up. We do lots and lots of systems where it's custom home, it's $1,000 a month bill, $500 a month bill, and also commercial systems.
Wow, okay. Those are big homes.
Yeah, exactly. Big carbon footprint.
Yeah, and of course, I guess it goes without saying that certainly recommended for people to reduce their electrical base load before getting their solar system sized. Is that part of any of your conversation with people when you see that kind of a bill? Right.
So absolutely. The right way to do it is to look at your loads first and try to conserve whatever way you can. We recommend if you have a swimming pool, get IntelliFlow, high efficiency variable speed pool pump. Look at LED lighting, look at compact fluorescent lighting, make sure you have an efficient furnace, although that typically impacts your gas usage more than your electric usage. Think about your lifestyle in terms of leaving lights on or turning lights off, things like that. And by the way, one other thing is electric vehicles are a wonderful way to go in terms of not only being environmentally beneficial, but boy, it's about the best thing you can do to your pocketbook, because an electric vehicle is equivalent to getting 100 to 125 miles per gallon. Wow. And of course, you never go to the gas station, you never have any emissions from your car, but it means that you're going to be buying a lot of electricity. And so if you buy an electric vehicle without a PV system, you'll see your utility bill skyrocket, and that might be a good time to put in a PV system, and we can size it to the load with the electric vehicle.
Is it possible, like, so if somebody has a photovoltaic system and then they get an electric car years later, can you add that and still use the same inverter, or do you need to change any of those components?
Right. So you can definitely expand your system, and we do this from time to time. Typically, you will add one or more new inverters. They're designed to be operated in tandem. We put in systems with up to 9 inverters. There's no problem. And so that's another good way to go, is to plan on adding later.
Okay. Yes, we just had a question come in. It's more for me. Will the PowerPoint presentation be available for future reference? It will be. We post the webinar and the PowerPoint slides on our webinar library, which is on our website, but that is available for Build a Green members only. Okay, I don't see any more questions coming in. So if you do have questions, again, Mark's willing to have people contact him directly. Thank you so much. We really appreciated this morning. It was really great. Okay, so we're going to sign off, everybody. Goodbye. Have a great day.